Hi, thanks for watching. Today we're going to be assembling the new Cruzbike Q45. The first step is unpacking your Q45. Assembly is best done on a nice padded surface. We're going to be assembling our Q45 using the Cruzbike toolkit, which comes with pretty much all the tools you need for assembly. Once you have unpacked your Cruzbike, you'll want to begin by removing all of the zip ties holding it together. Remove the wheels. Get rid of the packaging. And the first thing we're going to do is open up the front end and begin the assembly on the shock. The rear swing arm folds open, and from there we can remove the quick release from the shock mount, and we can rotate the rear shock around and attach it to the mount using the included quick release. The next step is to attach the rear caliper to the back suspension arm. Once the caliper is secure, note that the rear caliper is loose on the mount. We will do that brake adjustment at the end of the assembly of the complete bike. Make sure that the front end of the chainstay is attached to the fork. This will make it much easier to stand the bike up for the next step, where we will unwrap the handlebars and install the handlebar using the two clamps and a 4mm Allen. When you install the handlebars, ensure that the cables are routed above the handlebar, and then thread the mounting screws in. Make sure that the handlebar is centered on the slider, and position the handlebars so that they are near vertical. Final adjustments can be made later, but this is a good starting position. When you tighten the clamps, make sure they are tightened evenly. There should be an even gap on the top and the bottom. Be sure not to bottom out either side of the clamps. Now we will loosen the pivot clamp to do a boom and slider adjustment. Now is a good time to check the addendum and verify that the washers for the pivot clamp are in the correct location. Loosen the boom clamp and slide the slider so you have approximately 6 inches or so above the pivot clamp. Adjust the boom out a little ways. Final adjustments will be made at the end when assembly is completed. As mentioned earlier, take a quick look at the washers in your pivot clamp. If you see them located on the inside of the sleeve, this is incorrect. At this time, it is a good opportunity to move them to the outside. 2 on the sleeve side and 1 on the bolt side. If the washers need to be relocated, using 2 5mm Allens, simply slide the sleeve bolt out, relocate the washers on the inside. You should have 1 or 2 washers on the sleeve and at least 1 washer on the bolt. And then reinstall the pivot clamp bolt. Tighten the pivot clamp and the boom clamp temporarily just to keep everything from sliding around before moving on to the next phase of assembly. Next, locate all of the parts you need for the seat and lay them out in an organized fashion so we can begin the seat assembly and installation. In the parts box you will find the pedals, the rear seat bracket, which we will need for this step, 2 rear seat skewers, a parts bag including all of the bolts and nuts we need, the seat bottom bracket, with the quick releases installed. Note the orientation of the seat bracket. And finally, a rear wheel seat skewer that can be set aside. Gather the hardware you need to install the seat pan to the seat base mount. This includes 4 M6 bolts, 4 washers, and 4 nylock nuts. Also, set aside the screws needed to install the seat back to the seat base. That includes 2 rubber washers, 2 M6 bolts, and 2 nylock nuts. Using your J-Cool tool and a 4mm Allen, we will install the seat base onto the seat base mount. We're wanting to make sure that it is located as far forward as possible. Insert the screws through the base and tighten all 4. Once that assembly is completed, we can install the rear bracket onto the seat back using 2 M5 bolts, washers, and M5 lock nuts. First, we will install the seat base onto the frame. Remove the skewers from the seat mount, and we will insert the front skewer first, lightly attaching the other end of the skewer. Remove the rear skewer for now, and install the front portion of the seat base onto the seat, and then rest the rear seat brackets down onto the rear seat mount and install the rear skewer. Make sure to secure both skewers nice and snug, very similar to how you would tighten a wheel skewer. Next, locate the rear seat tube and install the rear seat tube into the frame. Locate the rear seat hardware that you set aside. Insert the bolts through the bottom of the seat back. Install the rubber bushings. And hold both of those in place while you install the seat back onto the seat base and secure with nylock nuts on the other end. They only need to be tight enough to just put pressure on the rubber bushings. Do not over tighten. The gap is meant to allow the seat to pivot slightly back and forth within a very usable range. Next, we will install the rear seat spacer onto the rear seat tube and the seat back using the 2 included skewers. Ideally, we want the rear seat bracket to be about a 90-degree angle to the seat. If it is too steep, the seat can push back. Use the seat tube to make sure the angle is as close to 90 degrees as possible. Ensure that the skewers are secure, similar to the skewers for the seat base. Next, we will want to install the front drive wheel. This is much easier if you have a rack stand to secure the front wheel or a friend to hold the bike up. Carefully insert the front wheel into the forks, and we will insert the skewer on the brake side and only insert it about halfway at this time to allow for the rear derailleur installation. The hanger is pre-installed on the derailleur. Note that one side is conical, faces inside the fork. Slightly spread the chainstay and install the rear derailleur. Note there is a small notch in the chainstay where the derailleur hanger rests. Once the rear derailleur hanger is installed, push the skewer completely through and tighten just as you would a normal wheel quick release. The derailleur is equipped with a cage lock, which will make installing the chain much easier. Simply pull the cage forward and depress the button and let the cage lock in place. Now is a very good opportunity to check for the correct derailleur cable routing. If it looks as the picture here, it is incorrect. The correct routing should go through and around the left side of the bolt. If your cable is not routed like the picture, you will need to remove the cable and reinstall it through the derailleur, through the sleeve, and around the bolt as shown in the video. This will allow for proper shifting and indexing of the rear derailleur. Please see the included addendum that will walk you through rerouting this cable should it need to be rerouted. If your cable needed to be rerouted, you will also need to verify that the first position of the derailleur is correct. To ensure that, make sure that the jockey wheel of the derailleur is lined up with the first ring of the cassette. If the alignment does not look like this picture, make sure you adjust that first position using the Allen screw on the back of the derailleur before tightening the cable at the derailleur. We have immobilized our Q45 with a rack stand to make it easier for us to install the rear wheel. Remove the protective cover from the dropouts and install the rear wheel, making sure that the rotor aligns between the brake pads. Once the wheel is installed, tighten the quick release. Locate and install the pedals. Note that there is a left and right pedal. One will typically have an L or an R or a groove indicating which side of the crank the pedal goes on. Install the pedals onto the cranks. If you backpedal, they should thread in on each side if they are on the right sides, and then tighten using your Allen wrench from the J-Cool tool. If you decide to install the optional kickstand, you may need to remove the top portion of the shock in order to easily access the bolt, particularly if using the included J-Cool Allen wrench. If needed, simply unbolt the shock and tighten the kickstand to the kickstand mount, and then reinstall the shock at the top mount with the quick release. Next, we will adjust our disc brake calipers. We want to center the pads over the rotor so you can see light on either side of the pads. Make sure they're nice and level, and then tighten the adjusting bolts. There are several YouTube videos on adjusting disc brakes should you need to reference those. Then we will repeat the same procedure for the front, making sure that our pads are centered over the rotor and tightening them. Give the levers a pull and make sure that everything works cleanly. Locate the chain and prepare it for installation, including locating the quick links. Before installing the chain, please make sure you have adjusted the derailleur cable correctly and made sure that the first position of the jockey wheel aligns with the smallest cog on the cassette. Drape the chain over the crank, loop it around the small cog, and you will go over the first jockey wheel, through the cage, and under and around the rear, making sure that the chain does not go over the protective shield of the cage. Using the quick links, attach them on either side of the chain, clip them together, and pull the chain tight. Should the chain not want to pull completely tight on this side, you can always rotate the chain to the power side on the top. Nice and carefully is to not derail the chain, and pull the crank and it will seat the quick link. Next, locate your reflector set. Mount the rear reflector on the rear seat tube and the front reflector on the handlebars. For the wheel reflectors, slide them between the spokes. One side of the reflector has a notch for a spoke, and then fit the plastic attachment into the hole and give it a half twist with a flathead screwdriver. Locate your seat and Velcro and install the seat pad onto the seat, making sure that the Velcro that attaches to the seat is aligned with the Velcro on the seat pad. Once you have everything installed, go back and do a double check, ensuring that everything is nice and snug and installed correctly, making sure all of the quick releases are connected and installed and tightened, making sure that your brakes are adjusted and properly installed. Make sure that the chainstay bolts are secure, and similar to the handlebar clamp, there should be a gap on either side. They should not be tight on one side with a large gap on the other. And your assembly of your Q45 is complete. Thank you so much for watching, and happy riding.